D-Luck. I think the gentleman you sent it to sounds based on the name and the surname Sri Lankan. So maybe there's an added connection there,
Yeah, yeah. Well
Yeah,
done.
I've met him and he seems very good. That's the impression I have.
Yeah.
He he basically he was speaking from the heart, and he said that he grew up on a council estate, and in his home there was mold, and he said that he's quite passionate about sorting that out. So
No, that's great. Because that Chandru Dissanayake, yeah, that's definitely a Sri Lankan name. So is that the person you're referring to there, George?
yes, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, it'd be nice to meet him actually. So
Yeah.
let me share my screen. Which one I share? I shared this one up here. So what? I'm now going to share this one up. These are my notes from. So what I did in terms of following on from Jarek, what you had done. I don't know if you had any time to look at it, but you had set this up, set all the pages up beautifully so that you zoom all the way up. I don't know if everyone's had a chance to look at this. I don't know, Jim, whether you had a chance to.
Yeah, I've been able to look at the paperwork.
That's great. So on the left-hand side is what Jarek had predominantly kind of done, and we've inputted, and the other people have sort of commented onto the Miro board. I then sort of on the right-hand side suggested some amendments just to reduce the number of pages, but also remove, I guess, things which are not relevant necessarily because they're to do with pre-transitional period and registering of buildings, which we're just taking the assumption that it should have already been done anyway, rightfully or wrongfully, so that the document is predominantly purely about going forward from the end of the transitional period. So that's why I've just basically copied it across, moved some information. So, for
Sorry
example,
to barge in. Did you explain that in somewhere in introduction or something?
No, I haven't. I didn't. So that's something that we've got to do.
But maybe it doesn't need explanation if the title of the document will be self-explanatory. But if not, then we may need to explain that.
Yeah, I'll make a note of that as well. So you're right. That's something I guess it's kind of either we had to write into this little column here, because that's really the introduction, isn't it? And then, as you say, into the title itself.
Yeah. And sorry, I didn't look at it. I had only 4 hours sleep, so I'm not the sharpest tool in the box today.
That's fine. So the aim really is that on the first page, we're really giving a brief update or commentary about what happened with the Grenfell and where the Building Safety Act came. On this column, it's about the kind of key impacts or the introduction of various things under the Building Safety Act, and then it talks about the kind of main changes that are applicable to all buildings or high-rise buildings. So that's kind of like the introductory page, so that and then it's got a link for people to continue to comment. And then what I did was, in terms of the key legislation, I've shared this with also Devonshire's Catherine George. So
Yep.
I think once we've redone this and are happy with it, I'll share it again, because there are some things that they will know as legal teams and legal professionals, just to make sure that we have got kind of legislation, arrows and relationships correct. But as you can see, there's nothing really major that I changed here, Jarek. I just put the title on the left-hand side, so as we read left to right. And the other thing I just did graphically was I started to refer to like go to process diagram 1 rather than pages, just in case page thing, we change it. So just kind of made it page, not page related, but process diagram related. There's a couple of questions in terms of we've got clarity now on the fact that the registered building control advisors, they come under different classes, and that's I've been in a couple of the Bureau Veritas seminars, webinars given by Andy Lowe, and I was just looking back at the that's what I had here, which is some of the slides from the Bureau Veritas, and I was going to go through this and add additional bits of commentary into our one, because I think Andy's presentations are quite good and quite clear. And competency, for example, is one thing that I actually noticed that we hadn't necessarily, I don't think, Jarek, mentioned about the need for the client to make sure that everyone's got the right competence, including themselves, really. I think we can probably stress on that a bit more in the diagrams.
Yeah, good idea.
So this page is really more kind of setting the scene, how different things are related. So that's where, like I said, some of these, I just wanted to get the legal help from Catherine from Devonshire, just to make sure that our arrows are pointing at the right thing, and the legislation thing. This was the page that I took out because this was really more of the timeline leading up to the 6th of April. On the left-hand side, and again on the assumption that we're obviously beyond that milestone. Although I think some things have been extended. I think like the deadline for registering yourself if you're a building control in control person, then that's been extended to later on this month, I think, for example. And then on the right-hand side, this is again to do with registering existing buildings. If they are fall within the definition. So this page I've sort of taken out on the assumption that what we're trying to do is to produce a document that's about that's valid going forward, not necessarily what should have been done.
Do you think there is any mileage in keeping that as a separate document, like a one-page reference for what
Maybe
should already happen?
An appendix. It could be an appendix, couldn't we? So in case people haven't yet or are trying to kind of backfill their knowledge.
I don't know. I'm not trying to clutch to it, by the way. I'm just wondering,
No, that makes sense. And then when we get into these, the diagrams, I really haven't changed that much. We've had some comments from others, which are quite useful, and I've yet to go through all of them in detail, but some of them, Jarek, I need your help because you see where you got these little hyperlink images. Yeah. I think, for example, here, this visitor has suggested that actually this is the correct link rather than the one here. So I wasn't quite sure how we replaced that one. So maybe after the call, you can just show me, and then we can put the right image in. I think, yeah, I realize it's like a hyperlink thing. But so there are a couple of that comments have been made, and I need to kind of go through that as well as looking at it with Andy Lowe's slides. But this one really, it's about again, I've just sort of made into pink the main titles and the forward and process diagrams, so that they relate to the kind of ends and the beginnings of each page. I think it's correct to call them process diagrams. This is really about determining whether the building is a higher risk building or not, whether it's existing or something new. One of the comments that was made about in this was about actually the idea that actually just because it's 18 meters or the kind of the sort of more high level comment thing, we must be careful about checking that when it comes to sort of complex multi-building developments. There's been quite a lot of discussions on the things like the architectural technical leads group where people are testing and getting varying feedback because they, for example, have two buildings and they may be connected by a podium or a basement, and they're trying to understand, and they're getting sort of maybe slightly different feedback. So I've just added that as a cautionary thing for people, that just because it may not fall within the 18 meters, it doesn't necessarily mean that it may not be considered high risk because of the interconnectivity. So I think that's something I've just added in there based on a comment.
So maybe we should add that to the process where your note is.
Yeah.
Go from the gateway to the left, and then to consider this as rather than caution, to be part of the process of checking whether this complex structure is to be considered, as high risk or not.
So
Or we can leave it as a caution, but as a process, it would be better, I think.
yeah, so somewhere it sort of applies to both, really. So it almost needs to be in this middle bit somehow, I guess.
All right. I think about it if we can somehow maybe incorporate that into the process.
Yeah, but I think you're right, because whether it's an existing building or a new development, that complicated development and interface between buildings is relevant. So I think you're right. It should go somewhere. I'll just put it overlapping here so we don't forget. Somewhere in that decision making.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think the actions for us, Ajarika, just to have a look at updating the links based on the comments that have been made in this page. I haven't done.
Sorry to barge in again. To paste the link, you just copy the hyperlink and paste into Miro, and this will be the embedded, as you can see, in that format. Make sense?
I think so. I'll give it a try. So, for example, if I take this, copy that, go to my Miro, and then just right-click and paste.
Yeah.
Easy, yeah. And then how did you put that little, is that just a symbol?
This is just an icon, so copy and paste.
Perfect. Okay, that's perfect. I'll do that. I don't know if that's not the right one, I think. But thank you for that. Bit of up-learning. I've learned something today. Then we go to the next one. So again, I've just said process diagram 1 continued. So we go to process diagram 1 continued. I've added in here, the main difference that I've done, Jarek, is I think feeding back from what Ben at the Ben Oram sent through. I think he was reading the fact that this is the gateway is on this page, rather than we get the gateway 1 approval at the end of this page as such.
Makes sense.
So I've moved everything up, and I've also added, just so it's clear, that all of this in reality, gateway 1 process, typically at RIBA stages 0 to 3. I put typically because theoretically could be at different stages. So I've just rather than, because there is a bit of flexibility, I guess, in that. When you go to planning, could be at stage 2, for example, rather than stage 3. So I've just graphically, they're the main changes in terms of the gateway approval. I put to the bottom of that particular page. And then I've added the headings, so it's a little bit hopefully clearer. Again, there are some feedback in terms of Simon's feedback, and I think yourselves and another lady. So we need to look at that in a bit more detail.
Sorry, one comment. So from diagram 1 and process diagram 2, they are not clear enough. You could mix the pages basically. Because you need to know from what point you're going to what point exactly. If you mix the pages, you wouldn't know whether you're in the right place, if that's what I mean, as in following the process.
Oh, so actually, this should actually say from diagram 1 continued, actually, shouldn't it?
Well, it needs to be clear that from that point on before gateway 1, from that point, you need to be clear what's the next step exactly.
Yeah, so what I was trying to do there in terms of process diagram 2 is to go to this page, which is process diagram 2.
Ah, okay.
You see what
All
I mean?
right. Maybe it's just me, but okay.
I think
I understand that.
previously, because you had continued to page 7, I was mindful that if this was somehow not a page-based document, then you would get lost because there is no page 7 going forward. So I was trying to kind of relate that to the heading of the particular thing. So
Okay.
this is process diagram 1 continued, and this is process diagram 1 continued. I guess it would be good
Okay.
to get feedback.
I think
it could help if it was in the same color, so that the two match up.
Yeah, I think the confusion I had was because you jumping from the process into the title rather than to the process.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Maybe that's my
I'm just being pedantic. I'm sorry.
No, but I think the way you are going from because actually this should be diagram 1 continued. Well, let's.
And maybe titles different color and those headers that color or something. So it just draws you into it, kind of. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that title is related to that. So that color, I think, should be the same. And then as you're noting there, let's see what the feedback is. As I say, it's funny, isn't it? Because in your mind, personally, when you're doing it, you think it makes absolutely logical sense, but it doesn't sometimes. The thing that I think I need to add here, I was just making a note, and this is where actually the things to do with competency, I actually think needs to be higher up, sort of somewhere in this diagram, because that really is about right at the beginning when people are appointing people, designers and principal designers, etc. The thing that I was going to add into this Gateway 2 was some of the things that I picked up from Andy Lowe's diagrams, which were related to, he expanded on some of the things or the things that you need to have together or collate for the Gateway 2 process. So competency declaration, construction control plan, etc. Now, what I noticed is that we hadn't gone into kind of listing that out. I think we may have a link somewhere, but I think it would be useful to spell those headings out at the beginning of this gateway, because that is the information that everyone has to collate when they're going through this process. So this
Good idea.
box I just kind of put in there because the client, appointing party, etc. But before they do any of that, we've got to remember that we've got to generate this information. So that information is required basically before we do this submission to the submission of the application to get it reviewed, validated, etc. So I think that's a key list that we need to add into this. Then there was just an email, note from Simon about whether this answers our question. I think it probably does. So I just need to read through that. And if it's another hyperlink to a document, we can put it here. But so that theoretically by the end of this process, you would get Gateway 2 approval. Application accepted, and then you move on to process diagram 3. That could be changed to.
You gone quiet.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. And then finally, again on this page, just slightly amended. So move the gateway to the end of that, and then gateway 3 process. I kind of put typically at RIBA stage 5, and then post gateway 3. I put post gateway 3 process RIBA stage 6, 7, and beyond, because this is applicable for the lifetime building. And again, just graphically, I just changed, kind of make this a green output, building project completion, and building can be occupied. And again, there are a number of comments and suggestions in here about things to do with some of the questions that we had. So I just need to go through that and make sure that we've either clarified that now or taken it out, because there are nuances to do with when is a project, commencement, starting on site, all of those little definitions, which I think we've tried to capture here. But again, I think it's worth, I'll just double check it in combination with the feedback and the notes from Andy Lowe's presentation, because that was only last week, so I think that's going to be pretty up to date. So that really is that's really the kind of overview of what I've done. I think the key things for us, if anyone's got any input, is really on checking things like, for example, Simon's given a link to Ben Orum's given advice on how much it costs, for example, to make an application, or things like the notifiable change can take up to 10 days to determine. A major changes can take up to 10 weeks, 6 weeks.
Sorry to just butt in a little bit, Andrew. One is your microphone keeps fading in and out. But one of the things about competency that came up in a number of association meetings that I've had with specialist contractors, specifically in fire protection, is about whether it's the organisation or whether it's the individual in a design term in this document. But unfortunately, I can't blow it up on my computer because obviously I'm sharing a screen. So is that clear that it's the individual and not an organisation?
No, I don't think that's one area that we haven't put in here, which I think is what we do need to do, is add the, so if I share the notes from Andy's, it's really, I guess, about these slides. And I think what we need to do is to extract a couple of the headlines, and I'm sure we could put a reference probably to the PAS document, which identifies how you may go about, showing competency or proving competency, and your point about whether it's the, and I think my understanding is people talk about that you've got to show competency as an organization, and then the individual themselves. It has to be a named person on these, well, when you're acting as the PD, really. So I think we do need to expand on that, and put in, for example, I know this PAS is out there. I know it's not necessarily considered to be really very clear, but I guess that's the only thing we have at the moment, to kind of build on.
Nobody has been very clear to me, because bearing in mind, most of the competency qualifications in fire protection are done on an organisation basis, and some of them are not even transferred to an individual engineer. So you may have an organisation, for instance, under BAFE, that's running a scheme SB 205, and you might not have an engineer that's had any of the competency training for that scheme. It could well be held by the directors, the competency, and there's the crux of the matter is I'm concerned about, because Grenfell is a classic example for the design was actually done by somebody that hadn't gone through any basic competency criteria. And so it's possible without peer review that it's going to be a fault started at the beginning, and as a function of an organisation being qualified under competency, but the person that's actually doing it not being so. But I took your point that you said that there is a case that individuals have to sign something off.
And I don't know, Will, I mean, from construction or manufacturing kind of point of view, have you had any, because I guess till we go through the reality is like till we go through some sort of examples, case studies, case law sometimes, everyone is still trying to figure out for the best. I don't know if, Will, you've had anything you can expand on that?
Yeah, really interesting. You've hit the nail on the head. We have literally got our first interaction with a Gateway 2 going through on a live project. Obviously, we specialize in smoke ventilation systems, designing, manufacturing, and installing. So we've effectively got to put a subsystem of our Gateway 2 proposal that then goes forward. Now, the relevance being is the level of granularity that we are going to go down to, including competence, including capability, including how to capture that. It's we're literally to an extent driving blind. We're trying it very openly with our client, who's a significant developer. And we're kind of going, okay, well, let's try this and see what happens. So we're very much into the very early stages, but most very deliberately, we've got a circular learning route. So anything we learn goes straight back in, and our process is evolving real time.
And I think that's all we can do. I mean, it's interesting just to read some of the slides that I took from Andy's things in terms of, let's see, I guess because there's a competence of designers, which is talking about these things, behaviors, ethical, obviously comply with any codes. Some of these things are clearly slightly untangible, like behavior, but you can only prove that, let's say, if you haven't been accused of something or proven. Some things are more easier to kind of prove, I guess, that you've been to a course, therefore you have the suitable competency to install X or Y, for example. So yeah, and I guess that's I mean, we're trying to, as an architect, we're trying to do the similar things where we are, going on the RIBA course, for example, listening to these kind of webinars from people like Andy, people like looking at the HSE webinars, trying to sort of, and obviously this whole workflow diagram has been really, really helpful because it just helps us, I guess, visualize what the flow is and identify where actually we don't know. So, at the moment in the competency, we can relate to some of these things, but the nice thing about the workflow diagram, I think, is that some things are going to be, some things are very simple. You submit this, and that, and you get approval. But then when you look into the detail of it, like defining a high risk building, from the discussions I've seen being party to, it's actually, when you get to the nitty gritty of particular projects, the whole thing starts to unravel a little bit. So we, on a project, and we're just about to start on acting as the building safety PD on on 3 projects actually, that are not high risk buildings, but they are at stage 4/5. And we've taken the decision, which I think is the only decision we can do, is to ask for some advice from a Building Safety Act PD advisor. Now, to be honest, they're also going to be learning because not anyone's had a huge amount, but it gives us someone to, I guess, bounce discussions through, and maybe they've got some templates. I know the RIBA released an Excel. I think DETA has been involved in that, generating this sort of big Excel spreadsheet about trying to demonstrate that you discussed every part of the building regs or functional requirements, etc. Now, that may be a good way to do it and not. And I know, obviously, George, you've got various matrices that you develop to kind of capture information in the active plan process as well. But so I think that's what we're doing. So it'll be interesting as our first actual projects where we're looking to be appointed. We haven't been yet, but we're just negotiating obviously fees and roles and stuff. But one thing that we have has just come out is the RIBA appointment document for a client to appoint a PD, a building safety regulator PD. So that's literally just come out at the end of last month, I think. And we've proposed that to our clients. So it'd be interesting to see what they say about that. And ultimately, a lot of project managers, unfortunately, are also saying, well, can you review your fee? It looks a bit high. But it's quite arbitrary, because how do they know that it's high? How do we know it's high or low? Again, from the architectural technical leads group, there's been some interesting feedback about how people are trying to provide fees for this. All we can do, I think, at the moment is to understand the activities and try and put some time against those activities to generate a fee. And because it's really early on, we could be way off, we could be just about right, or we could be very under. So I think we will take the view that we can't negotiate down our fee when we don't actually know that. It's not like you can reduce the scope. The scope is defined by the Act, and therefore we think this is what we need as a fee proposal or a resource profile to do that job properly.
Well, I really can understand that and concur with that, and that's why the work that you've done here is so good, because there is some time in all of the things that we need to check as a checklist. And I'm really glad that you said that we do have to put some due diligence into when we're sourcing anything, not only about the organization, but about the individual that's going to be responsible for the contract. So, and then at least we can be assured by others that we've done the work that we needed to do to comply. And so that the client then has to understand that process, going through that process, is done on an individual basis because of the scope of the works that need to be done.
Yeah, and I think the reality is, again, Jim, is that we've got an advisor. We're looking to appoint an advisor, but again, they don't have a huge amount of experience. No one does. So that kind of to kind of say, well, how many projects have you done like this? Well, probably one,
Yeah.
maybe two, or very early, or bits of the gateway processes. So I think everyone has to be, and the biggest thing is that behavioral change. Everyone has to be open, collaborative, and say when they don't know, because that is, I guess, where the biggest problems are, when people pretend they know everything.
Sure.
So I think that spirit of learning has to be completely transparent, and we're saying to our clients, we don't know it, so here we're appointing someone to help us.
We've always used contractors that are problem solvers and willing to have a go for us when it's new.
Yeah.
Everybody does, and 9 times out of 10 it works perfectly well, because they're around that sort of competency and that due diligence, that they would make sure that the thing comes out. But that's not dotting the I's and crossing the T's for this piece of legislation, because the piece of paper or the certificate or the CPD course, or I'm very careful now when I give a career development course that this is not providing competence. This is creating background. It's creating stuff for further learning, because whoever put I see they put behavioral aspects in as a function of competency, because that's what the textbooks say you should be looking for. But there is other work that needs to be done to prove competency, especially in the as I say, especially as specialist contractors are concerned, because it's ongoing. It's a dynamic process.
It's no different to kind of continual professional development. The CPDs that we had to keep to maintain our RIBA register or anything like that. So I think that I think there's a bit of background work to do in terms of just looking at the comments that have come through and the additional links or updated links. I think there's a bit to have here, Jarek and the team, about, let's say, this whole competency and the appointment bit, because I think that's something that we haven't, that is critical to, right at the beginning. And like I said, I'm not exactly sure where we should put that so it doesn't get lost. This feels like it may be too early, because this is just determining whether the project is. I think the competency thing, therefore, theoretically has to start when you're looking at appointing a fire consultant, for example. So maybe it's somewhere in here at the beginning of the top of this, for example. And then I think the main thing that we need to add into the Gateway 2 process is the main elements of information or things that have to be done, which is I've sort of extracted from Andy Lowe's into this little bubble here, that we need to almost maybe put in advance of this thing here. So maybe move this down and say the aim of this workflow or this diagram or this process is to generate these outputs, because that's what's needed for the application. So yeah, there may be a little bit of jiggling around here to do, but that's and I think then it's really there's a couple of nuances about this 2-week period, the 12-week. I haven't seen anyone say something different in terms of time periods, but that will be the only other thing that will be really useful to get. Again, Will, for example, if you're going through this process, whether you know actually it's taken longer. Now, the other thing I wanted to bring up was this is the feedback that Graham King from SaferSphere, who are a specialist building safety X CDM provider, and this is a presentation I think he gave to the architectural technical leads group, and it's interesting to see the real life situation. They're seeing these sort of 6-month delays on applications. So everything from case officer on leave, real life scenarios, I guess, lack of response from fire authority, so on and so forth. So I guess a bit like what we all expected, the capacity within the new building safety regulator is obviously quite low. And we've seen this, for example, AIS, who were on some of our projects, they've gone into liquidation. So that's quite a large body or a team. And then Ascent Building Control are not looking to register. So he's identifying that actually there's sort of 50 projects that are now don't have the relevant building control inspectors or registered inspectors on board, and therefore those projects are also now falling onto the building safety regulators remit. So that's quite interesting. Another thing, I think there's a couple of things about the submission, just jumping over from appeals. I think that's sort of, as we spoke about before, about what does elections mean? What does the kind of, do you want to rock the boat? So I think his point here is some of the clients are just taking the view that, well, they won't rock the boat, they'll just let it go and then deal with it. But this was quite interesting, and I think this is something we can include into the Gateway 2 process, is being mindful as a team. When my biggest understanding is that as a design team, we've got to justify and make a little statement, a narrative, to say why we think our design of a staircase or a smoke extract system or whatever complies with the building regulations. So what Graham's saying here is that in that little narrative, we should be very definitive, not ambiguous, and therefore when the building regulator reads it, ultimately they can say, yep, they've kind of said that their design meets it, they meet it for X, Y, and Z reasons, therefore we move on. Ultimately, they're not taking any responsibility, I think is what we realize, and therefore as a design team we have to, and I think that should, I don't have a problem with that, because that's I think what the design team should do anyway, with the subspecialist input, etc. But his guidance is that we must be using these words or respond to these words, and that's something we can, I guess, put as a helpful note in Gateway 2 process. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I saw the hand. Sorry.
No. I was just going to say, I think this is very, very useful, because this is from the ground. I'm also very conscious, though, that some of the other people haven't spoken yet. So I'm just wondering whether we should get some. Don't break off doing this, because I think it's valuable. But I'd just like to ask, Ben, for example, what's your experience, Ben?
I was really enjoying this because this is like bang on what we've seen in reality.
Yep. Okay, I'll shut up then and finish. Let Daz finish.
No, sorry,
I'll-
no, it's fine. Sorry, Ben. I wasn't quite. I didn't see you on the. Cause I don't see the full list of the attendees. So, Ben Blackwood. Could you just say where are you from? Sorry, I should know this. but
I'm from Ballymore.
Oh, okay, fine. Fantastic.
So we're at the stage where we've got 2 Gateway 2 applications in at the moment for relatively large schemes, and we've got a number of other ones in preparation at the moment. And yeah, we're on week 18 of the 12-week program for 2 of them.
Mhm.
And yeah, the reasons for the delay are pretty much exactly what you've listed there. People being on leave, members of the team uncontactable, and fire brigade.
Yeah.
There's also been a number of issues with the portal. So, you know, the fire brigade, they haven't actually started their review yet, although we're on week 18. Not quite sure the reasons for that, but certainly some of the other elements of the multidisciplinary team have struggled to get information that we've submitted. And there's a number of RFIs that we've had are all in relation to not being able to access information that we've already submitted.
I see. And I guess the portal is acting as the essentially the kind of common data environment for this process, isn't it? Or this piece of.
That's right, but
know.
it's not. Sorry, I'll pick you up on that. It's not a common data environment. It doesn't do revision control, and
I see.
it doesn't allow them to download more than one document at a time. So, you know, certain people are saying it takes them the first day to download the documents. And it seems to be a real foot on the pipe, that element of the process.
So Ben, what would be useful? I don't know if you had time to look at the Miro board and the workflow before, but
Yep.
You're exactly the kind of people that would be useful just to kind of say, actually, when we went through this page, for example, actually there were some things. So the 12-week is clearly the statutory period, so that's good that we got the fact right. Obviously, we know the reality may change, and maybe we could. I don't think we need to add anything more, because I think here what we're trying to deal with is pure whatever the facts are meant to be, if you see what I mean, rather than what's actually happening in real life. I think the reality is everyone is aware that things slip and change, but it would be useful if there are other steps or other bits of information or other links to useful websites. What we've tried to do is to stick to either gov.uk or HSE links only, because theoretically they should be the most up-to-date and accurate. But it would be useful to understand whether there was anything in these 2 slides particularly, and obviously going forward into the kind of construction stage, that you've done or have had to do, which is different to what we've got, because as I say, you've gone through it, which is invaluable information. So yeah, if you I don't know if you have the link or anything, but we can share the link. And
Yeah,
then so
that'd be
you can just-
great. I do think like these are really good, and I think fundamentally we wouldn't have anything to add, but we could maybe provide some supplementary, like anecdotal evidence to show like what could happen.
Yeah.
But obviously you've shown the correct path there. If it's helpful as well, I've provided my own one, which is very similar, but for existing buildings like renovations.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll share that to you.
Fantastic. Yeah, because that's sort of what we had alluded to in this diagram, which is the one which is about existing buildings, which had to be both registered, but it's also what we're trying to do with things like existing buildings, and understanding whether they need to. So, for example, one of the things I've got to add from Andy Lowe's presentation is about there is I think it was a list of I think I've got it here. Sorry, let me. Yeah, there are, for example, works existing HRBs or works to buildings that may become. And there are these sort of category A, B, and exempt work lists. So again, Jarek, I think these are the, we just had to find the links to where these are, because that's quite useful, because we've got a scenario with, say, Westminster City Council. They're looking to do some work in a high risk building, but to, you know, replace the kitchens or the bathrooms as part of, like, say, their decent home standards. But what I understand from this is that actually those things would be exempt, which makes sense. Or if they are sort of self-certified piece of work, like I think you know, someone coming in to change a fuse box, for example, and that gets certified by, you know, NICE, for example, person. So
Yeah, a couple of interesting things we found about that is that the guidance, like they've put there, it's not very helpful for HRBs. You know, the examples given on the government sources are not that detailed. And any questions that we've asked for the BSR to say, you know, we're changing a fire door that's been damaged using a competent QMark BM Trada approved contractor, with a like-for-like fire door, is that building work and do we need a Gateway 2 application? They've said yes, you do, which was surprising. The bar for what constitutes building work is lower than most people would expect.
And was that a communal door?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That seems to be, that's sort of where I had in my mind that, yeah, essentially, if it's sort of facade or communal elements, then yes, it kind of, and that most people are basically saying, well, if you would normally need a building building control submission. Now, you're right, sometimes a replacement of a door, I'm sure millions of doors have been replaced without going to building control, but that's where I've very simplistically have taken the view that facade works or communal corridors, lighting, fire detectors, doors would fall into the kind of I guess the category A, I think. Yeah, category I think works. So, but it's interesting to hear that is exactly what's happening in real life as well, which makes it humongously you know, if you think about, for example, Westminster City Council, our client, they may only own some of the apartments within within the block. So, and they may only be able to do the works to, let's say, in upgrading insulation to the external walls or something, particular times when the tenants are not there or the tenants have been, you know, moved to a different place. And that if you had to start the whole building gateway process for every single time a tenant or flat became available, that's quite a lot of work. So we're trying to work with them to figure out whether there's some sort of design guide or a design book like you might have in conservation projects, where you agree that if these works are done, they're already sort of pre-signed off. But I'm not sure if that's
kind of analogous to the competent person scheme, but the competent person scheme only covers very limited elements of work, and you know, it's basically gas, electrics, and external doors. There doesn't seem to be any other elements that are covered.
Right. Yeah.
So to barge in, I've got my hand up for a while, and I
I
will forget what I wanted to say. First of all, referring to what Ben just said regarding to complexity, I don't think we can capture everything in this workflow diagram because it can't be so much detail in there. But we should have links to the categories and exceptions which you just shared, Daz. Incorporate them in the process, definitely, and then links to it. But then to explain that in detail, that must be separate, I think, because it's just too much detail. And also that would link nicely into those examples of the existing problems we have, which should be part of lessons learned. And that somehow should be then linked. I don't know how, but it's really good, valuable information. And then finally, you mentioned about this competency. I think in the diagram we should have this in multiple places. First of all, generally the competency is like a strategic issue within construction, and so that should be somewhere on top as a start of the process. And then we should have, now alluding to what Jim said, we should have some trigger points within multiple points within the process, where you have to check or should competency of organization or individual at particular points. Where those points are, I don't know yet, but that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, maybe for the in the first instance, we can reiterate that competency on all pages as a more of a statement, with before getting too granular, I guess, and making the kind of the diagram like too bitty, sort of, if you see what I mean. So we can, I think you're right, we can put it, for example, up here, so that on every page it reminds people, whoever is looking at it, have we got the right people, have we got the right checks and balances in place. That's really good. And I think generally a bit like, I remember back like when, you know, the BIM level 1, BIM level 2, all those discussions happened like 10 years ago. It's one thing is obviously having the theory, which is, I guess, is what we're trying to map out here. And then the value really comes in when we have sort of almost a mirror page of this to say, well, actually, this is what is actually happening in life, real life.
Yeah.
These are the benefits, these are the negatives, which is, I guess, what you know, Graham's helping us to map out, and Ben, you're also, you know, being able to help, and hopefully I will also be, from an architectural point of view, be able to add to that as we go through real life projects, because that's really the you know, the kind of the proof, isn't it, as to how these things actually map out. But I think, yeah, this is I'll share this this little PDF as well. But again, it's just kind of from Graham's things to do and things not to do, in terms of level of detail of the information, and then I think he also talks about where some people have tried to sort of submit bits of information to try and get an approval, but they're misunderstanding some of the phrases like information requirements, because they're trying to submit something which is not actually a complete design. I think that's what he was getting at here. So I'll share this. I'll share that on the chat now as well, because I think it's a really good. And again, Ben, there may be things that you could add to this on top of this PDF, and say, actually, yep, all of this is what happened to us, or no, actually something else happened, or there were more things that we need to keep a lookout for, and that could become sort of a lessons learned, or a real life set of markups which we can put you know, adjacent to the theoretical, because I think that will be quite useful.
Yeah, that's a great idea to have it on the side as real life lessons learned.
Yeah, so that, yeah, we can kind of build on it, because I guess in a way we've got a PDF version of these pages, which is good for sharing, and then theoretically this Miro board could also be live, which people could add into, and we could obviously periodically review this, you know, as things go by. Yeah, maybe there's some tidying up to do, isn't there, Jarek, of the Miro board, just to get rid of some things, but we can work on that separately.
Could I just ask, Will, from the manufacturer's perspective, is this useful for you?
Massively, absolutely massively, because as I said earlier, we're working in cooperation with the design team, and we're all working not blind, but we've all got a kind of bandwidth of, we're staying within on where we're going, but this is just really good information. It is just so helpful. The point is, there is no answer to this, but the more information you get, a momentum, you get a consensus, and you know, from the outside looking in, I think that's the way this whole process will work, almost by industry consensus, as opposed to a regulator being very specific about it. So yeah, I think it's down to everybody in the room and manufacturers, all of us as an industry, to keep going forward, because ultimately what it's doing is good. Hugely frustrating, and there's going to be some significant delays and costs, etc. But the benefits in the long term are just massive.
Well,
Yeah,
it's
thanks
putting
for the
back, it's putting back everything that's gone as a race to the bottom, isn't it? It's putting back all of what I used to call, the site manager's responsibility of check, recheck, measure twice, and cut once. It's fantastic for me because I've just watched over 40 years the race to the bottom, getting rid of all the technical resources, getting rid of all the specifications, and just quoting for equivalent, and that equivalent coming from Taiwan or China or whatever. So yeah, I'm really pleased, and I concur with you, Will. Great.
I think
Great.
part of the issue here is that if it's all documented as to the activities that have got to be carried out, then when somebody is then pressing back on fees, you've got
Exactly.
something to actually have a proper discussion on.
Exactly.
What would you like me to drop?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think the point that someone made is that there's nothing you can drop because it's a statutory requirement to do X, Y, and Z.
Well, no. That's the outcomes. Yeah. So the point, the beauty, I think, of what we're doing here, we're actually going into the detail of the activities that need to be carried out to deliver the outcomes. Yeah. One of the things that we're doing, so I just give you a bit of feedback from the construction group. So the construction group met yesterday, and one of the things that came out of that was that Lucy Craig from Mace is currently doing the RIBA principal designer qualification, and what she was saying is that, and I need to probably listen back to what she actually said, just so I make sure I don't get it wrong. But broadly, what she was saying was that the way RIBA are looking at the principal designer BSA role is that you get appointed and it's for the whole scheme. So if it's a design and build, that breaks that connection. And I think they're recommending to their members that they should therefore refuse the commission. Now, that's massive, because if people are going through the qualification and then they're not able to work on, I think most of us have got a view as to whether D&B is a good or a bad thing. But the fact is, it's still the way most procurement's done. And therefore, we need to have a pragmatic way of doing that. So that was one point. The other thing that we're doing, just to feed into that as well, the other thing that we're discussing at the moment is introducing government soft landings into the process, because that could be a mechanism which formalizes a lot of the what are really slightly intangible things about the golden thread, because there are a certain number of checks and activities that the framework of soft landings actually does bring into the process. So that might be something that we ought to be wrapping in.
Sense. I'm aware of, for example, like Sharon or Ron. They got. I'm not sure if I've met before, but any thoughts or observations, please?
Sharon, come on, the passive fire side of things, or have you gone off with coffee?
Sorry, I've just parked up and I've missed most of it, so apologies. I think the problem is we're so far down the food chain that all the decisions are made, all the problems have been made, and we're left to pick up the pieces, and it's like broken Lego pieces. The gaps that are left over, the passive fire industry is expecting to sort of sweep in and have a magical cure for everything. There's new builds that are not being built to specifications. We've got requirements, but for some reason, the tier one contractors are building to it. It's the same as Jarexo's, designed. There doesn't seem to be the same information going out to every party. So the M&E contractors are installing what suits them, but it's not compatible with fire protection measures. So I think there's everything that I hear just now is just negative. Everything's, by the time we get onto site, there's problems left, right, and centre. There seems to be no forethought, and then we are responsible to, issue the fire certificate as it keeps getting called. We've got handover, we need your certificate, but it doesn't matter how much is done on paper and how much is talked about in terms of the REBA stages. We still feel as if we're turning up and all the deficiencies from everybody else is passed on to ourselves, and the insurers and everyone's getting more nervous, and we're having to become more cautious in response to that. So it's a very difficult time for us.
Yeah, Sharon, you're breaking up quite badly, but I think what you and what you within Avesta do, and also within the ASFP, is so critical to all of this. We're very keen to have your input. Ben.
Yeah, I beg your pardon. Just I thought about to make a point of order. I've when I was reading Andrew's piece there, I was very excited to see how much we could identify with those comments. But now that you sent through the document, I can see who they've come from, and BJY are working for us at the moment. So actually that might be my own comments getting reflected back to me. So I've just realized I may have given the impression that they're more pervasive than they actually are. So I better just point that out. Apologies for that.
No, I think you may be misunderstanding, Ben. Daz, just confirm. I think what was done there was a presentation that was done by Safersphere to the group. And I think,
okay.
I think they were. I think the architect was just summarising what had happened at the meeting.
Okay. All right. Okay. Concern averted. Thank you.
Am I right, Daz?
That's right. Yeah, it was basically the Safersphere, because they are a consultant, had given a presentation. So as far as I understand it, exactly what Georgia said is what is happening. Ben just happens to be also leading that architectural technical leads group. That's where the overlap comes in. So that's a sort of similar kind of knowledge sharing group, and they call ATLG, so Architectural Technical Leads Group. And it's interesting because they're talking about some of the similar things to do with definitions of what a high rise is, and it's very much coming from the architectural side. So it's quite useful for me because they'll talk about something to do with, let's say, partition head restraint, which goes into like minutiae, which it's maybe a little bit too much. But then some of the other conversations is about fees to do with this role, or definitions of some of their projects where they've submitted an application but it's been refused, but it doesn't make sense why it's been refused. So yeah, I think that was a presentation by Graham from Safersphere to that group.
Right. Well, something that's in a similar sort of track that we've encountered, as well as virtually every single one of those things, we have also seen where a client is unsure if something needs a Gateway 2 application or not, and they've asked a third party consultant to give an opinion. The tendency seems to be for the consultants to say, yes, it needs a Gateway 2 application, where then what's happened is the client has then forwarded the consultant's response to me and said, are you sure this is right? And I'd say in 80% of cases, they've been overcautious and said that a Gateway 2 application is needed when it actually doesn't. The reason for it is that, like, for example, if you've got a refit of a shop and a shop is under a high-rise building, but it's a completely separate section with a fire compartmentation and the no access to the building, then it's not an HRB. it's a building on its own and it doesn't need a Gateway 2 application. And consultancies seem to be getting that wrong.
Yeah, because that was one of these are kind of, again, the good sort of case studies, isn't it? Because I think originally there's a bit of ambiguity. What about if you touch the facade with the louver that might be coming out of the shop? Does that then kick in? I don't actually know what the answer to that is, but it's all these little case studies which we can add to the, to almost the right-hand side of this Miro board and say, we've had one example where this has been the case and it has been registered. So that will then almost define a new workflow or a new set of guidance for the team, more on anecdotal and real life scenarios rather than theoretically what's said in the black and white document.
But what should we do in that situation? Ben described what in our work flow diagram. What is the advice? What shall
I'll send you the
happen?
link. There's actually quite a good guidance note. It's one of the guidance notes that is actually very good, and that's on the .gov website. I'll send you I'll put the link in the chat.
Perfect.
Thank you.
It provides you some really clear tests that you can apply, and it tells you that it leaves only maybe 10% where you would maybe make a judgment, like in the situation that Andrew's just stated. You might make a judgment and say, well, actually it's not covered, but I think this. But 90% of cases it's very clear.
That's really good. That's good to hear that it's more comprehensive than less than scenarios. Ron, I don't know, Ron, which organisation?
With William Cox, we're contractors. We smoke vent contractors based in Ireland.
Okay, yeah. Have you had any experience of projects, or are you going into projects which require applications?
No, we don't. Not at the moment, because we're based largely in Ireland. But I'm very interested in the competent person, and I do a little bit of work with people in the UK. And I'm concerned about the fact that the person who starts the job isn't responsible for the job, as I understand it, right until the end of the lifetime of that project.
Do you want to expand on that? Maybe
So
it
if a fire engineer designs a project and then it starts to move, and then it goes to another group of consultants and they apply the fire engineer's works, when they change things, okay, they have liberty to change, and the fire engineer doesn't need to approve that for the next phase. And when the fire department signs it off, again, I experience items where there's changes at the fire department or building control officer. Now that alleviates all the responsibility on the original fire engineer, and that leads to people changing products. Whereas if the fire engineer is responsible from cradle to grave on that project, there'll be no changing of equipment.
Ben, you might be able to kind of expand. I mean, I've got my view on what should happen or not happen, but Will or Ben, just in real life, Will, do you want to jump into that? That might be helpful.
I know, Ron. This is why Gateway 2 is so exciting, and I picked out one of the lines in the in what you just put round about the level of detail required. It depends on the approving authority or the individual who's looking at that case. To elaborate, Ron, what the principle of Gateway 2 is what is approved at Gateway 2 cannot be changed without going through what is potentially a 6-month cycle. Okay, so therefore the question is, how much granular detail do you go into at Gateway 2? So if you go into really, really significant granular detail, so that is a very, very comprehensive design, the opportunity to substitute out inferior products that don't have the performance characteristics is reduced. So, Ron, in answer to your question, your concerns, I believe, if Gateway 2 operates correctly, go. Because the person who did the original design, down to if they do it properly down to a granular level, will wash all the way through. So before it is handed over to Gateway 3, it is the system, the installation is approved against the Gateway 2 performance specification and design. If that happens, then that should alleviate the fears that you have.
That would be beautiful if that happens, but
Yeah,
in
that
theory,
doesn't.
the specialists are never on board at that point, which is a problem, isn't it?
And I think this is where it maybe pick up on Sharon's frustration as well, that I say for architects, again, the gateway process felt like a very good thing, because a lot of the time on a lot of the projects we do, which are DMB, clearly the design evolves after stage 5, sometimes because of the procurement route, because the procurement route means that you've got to get into a contract with a fixed price before the contractor can then realistically start appointing some of the specialists like facades or M&E. So the procurement route also is I think a bigger issue as well. But yeah, gateway, what the gateway process does for obviously theoretically for, well, technically for the high risk buildings, is that it theoretically means that the contractor, the client, everyone on board, the procurement team, the designers should be able to design once with the right input. So Sharon, in your case, the workflow that's been discussed again, the correct workflow, which I think I agree with, is, you know, when it comes to like building work, BWICs, that's really driven by the M&E, because most BWICs are related to M&E or civils. And then the specialist passive fire specialists would come in and make sure that their designs comply with the substrate and the things that are going through that BWIC, and therefore lock in that design at pre-gateway 2. So we as architects would coordinate that from an aesthetic point of view, making sure the holes are in the right place, not clashing with something. But as you say, Will, that theoretically would mean that the design is suitably developed enough. Now, as the role that I'm looking to take on, be appointed for, which is the principal Building Safety Act principal designer, I need to therefore sign off, having discussed with the team and got reassurance. Now, I don't need to necessarily be the complete fire expert, but I need to make sure that the client's appointed the competent team, and basically having a workshop with them, say, to be able to sign off at Gateway 2 that the design complies with building regulations because X, Y, and Z. And that's a summary or a high level summary following workshops and feedback from the specialist competent people. Now, the contractor at the end of the project has to sign and say the building has been built according to the design to meet the building regulations. Now, that again, Ron and Sharon, if they change something without telling us and without going through the change control, the major or the notifiable, then they are 100% liable if something goes wrong, because they've signed that declaration. Because if they do want to change something, then it doesn't really matter who designed it at Gateway 2. That change control process would require a new, say, fire consultant or specialist to then work with the team and the PD and the PC to then justify the change and the reasoning behind that, put it back into the building regulator to get that approved before implementing that on site. So they're much more, and I think the kind of stick, I guess, from a carrot/client point of view, is the timeframes. You know, these sort of 6 weeks to get a major, and we can see from the feedback that it's clearly going to take longer. That's a huge amount of change, and potentially the client's not going to want to know and pay for that delay. The contractor will have to bear that. That could be result in LADs, you know, the kind of liquidated damages and stuff. So therefore, the stick therefore is that unless there's a really, really, really good reason, like the specialist has gone bust or something, changes shouldn't occur, because actually all the penalties should be borne by the contractor who's trying to make the change for whatever reason.
Yes. Could I just ask the question? One of the approaches that we're taking at the moment is looking at the technical submittal process, because that's something that seems to be very widely used by most contractors.
Yeah.
And because it's driven by money, typically, it happens. Yeah. But if we could improve that technical submittal process so that the specification for that item is adequately prescriptive, and the product that is actually picked is then clearly defined? I think that ticks a lot of boxes. Ben, how do you do it? Do you use technical submittal
we've
process?
always done that, and our policy is, now let's be honest, the quality of documentation from some trade contractors is better than others, but our policy is that for a technical submittal for, say, even like 10 years ago, for a smoke control system, the first page of that tech sub should be the specification.
Yeah.
And then it should be they should tick to indicate that they've complied with everything. And if there's something where they haven't, they have to identify it, and then there should be what we would call a trade contractor's proposal, which even historically we would have to take to building control and say, look, you've already signed off all our specifications, but here's a proposal, we're going to deviate from that. Are you happy about this? So basically, the Gateway 2 is no different. It just means that we would do that a bit earlier, and then that proposal would be baked into the actual design that we issue within our Gateway 2 submission. And we do that. For example, what Andrew was saying earlier about builders works, with the best will in the world, I've never met any architect who would be able to be fully confident in specifying the builders work openings around fire rated ductwork, because it's hard. And unless you've got like a specialist ductwork and damper manufacturer like sitting there reviewing it, like you've got no chance of getting that right. And Sharon will know how hard that is. So we tend to bring in those people early, and we will have those conversations and design that out and then bake it into the design. That does require either you pay those specialists to come in earlier than they would do, and you just pay them to do this work, and then it goes into the design, and then they'll probably get their own information back at tender stage like later, or you appoint it earlier, or quite often these specialists, you work with them for 20 years and they're quite willing to do you a favor on the chance that they might get the work. What's been a little bit unethical in our industry is, previously people would do that and then give it to somebody who's cheaper using the design that's been done by the good contractor. But I think Gateway 2 will actually help prevent that, because if any trade contractor any main contractor tries to do that, then there's no chance that the cheaper and maybe less helpful trade contractor will be able to provide the same level of design submission.
Yeah, exactly. I've got three hands. So first Sharon, then Will, then Jarek. But I think George, I don't know, the feeling in the industry was that when this came out was that everything moves forward a stage, i.e. complete design in stage 4 when it's meant to happen, as the RIBA stages say, and the technical submissions should be also part of the design process and not in construction, which is typically when they've always been used to substitute something. Sorry, Sharon, you go.
I was just going to say that my experience is that no one has, I agree with what Ben just said, but my experience is that there doesn't seem to be any reference to any of the builders work openings. There doesn't seem to have been any reference to any manufacturers, and there doesn't seem to have been any single person that's reviewed any of the manufacturer's installation guidelines. So we are being used as almost like an additional building control measure. They'll bring dampers to site, and half of them you're trying to explain that's for a wall, not a floor, or it says on the manufacturer's brochure that there's no fire stopping involved. It's a plasterboard opening that needs to be created, and here it is on page 72, and I've snipped it for you. And it just seems like, and I agree, there's an awful lot of information going about, and I can't do anyone else's job, but it just feels that by the time it gets to the end of the line, we are responsible to either fix the deficiencies, and we can't accept design responsibility. So now I'm the harbinger of doom because I'm the only person that gets all the bad news, because I'm left with all the, whatever's shaken out of the filter and whatever's left, the mess at the end of it, you're now responsible for it. And if we can't continue for our, our insurances, we can't take on design responsibility, and we don't want to be changing materials from one to another, because again, we know that it can have an impact on someone else up the food chain. But I'm just concerned that there seems to be all this, we're doing a really good job, but the basics aren't being covered by those responsible.
Jarek, you were next, and then Will. Oh.
So, yeah,
I think Will's next.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
Will. Sorry.
Yeah. So Sharon. Well, Ben. First of all, thanks for raising the point. Yes, Sharon, we're slightly different in as much as we do design. We do take design liability on a manufacturer. So kind of back to Ben is 100%. The way we are approaching Gateway 2 submissions is going down to a level of granular detail in terms of sizes. So we all know end of corridor 1.5 square meters. So it has to go down to that level of detail as a full bill of quantities. But very clearly, you don't want only to be able to procure from SE Controls. So the way we're putting that tech sub together, or Gateway 2 submission, is we're referencing the essential characteristics which come out of the European product standards that are for smoke ventilation. So an NSHEV has essential characteristics. By doing that, that gives you, the main contractor, the design team, full ability to go to tender to get the most competitive price, but at a level of performance that will satisfy the design. And to me, that's critical, because then in terms of sign off after installation, it's absolutely clear what that product has got to do, how it's got to perform. So the tools are out there, but guess the message is, it's all down to that, what goes into the earlier design, I guess.
And that's,
from a coordination point. Sorry, Ben. Just saying, from a coordination point of view, and to avoid what Sharon's talking about, the size, the geometrical size of these things have to be defined, because otherwise, no point in having RC concrete with BWICs, which then can be changed because the performance is the same, but you need a bigger thing or whatever that may be. So by definition, you got to define the size and the performance of these elements. Otherwise, the coordination goes out the window. And if a substrate changes, then it also impacts, I guess, on the products that you can choose. Sorry to butt in there, Ben, Jarek, or Jarek, Ben.
Sorry, if I may now. I just wanted to point out practical issues with all what we discuss. There's two problems. Obviously, most of people, or every company I work with, operates through technical approvals, but there's two problems which breaks the whole process and change responsibility and increase costs. One is there's very, very often errors with technical design, and no one seems to check this until the contractor who's about to install it points it out. Second, no one checks whether the product is actually available, and that triggers change as well. And then responsibility goes out of the window as well. Those 2 points should be somewhere in the process as triggers and points to be checked, because otherwise all the hard work just goes to the bin, causes delays, increased costs.
Could I just float an idea? Would it be possible to have a standardized technical submittal process? The reason I say that is because if it were, picking up on what Will was saying earlier, using the essential characteristics, for example, but that's only relevant products that have got essential characteristics. Would it be possible to have something, Ben, that you would use that maybe other contractors like you would use?
I think if you tried to do that, it would need to be quite high level, such that it's probably common sense anyway. I'll give you an analogy. So the you know, it's really easy to, like, if you've got a pedestrian door that acts as an AOV, you would, you know, the architect could quite easily go, oh yeah, that needs to be, you know, what is it, EN 12101 compliant smoke vent. Cool. Yeah, no one's going to argue with that. But if I invite a smoke control specialist to the meeting, Will tell me within the first 3 minutes that there's no such thing, and that that's going to be cause problems, and it would be better to engineer a different solution. But engineering a different solution is probably going to make some fairly fundamental changes to your design, which are easy to do at an early stage but hard to do at a late stage. And this is how we end up with, you know, numerous things which are built on site, which are, they technically look okay on the face of it, but they're, in design terms, it's a bit of a fudge. And I think there's not really any alternative to having those the right people in the you know, in the room at the right time, and having the technical team curate the information, but based on technical input from people generally a lot earlier, and that should be crystallized in a technical submission, like you say. But I think quite often the technical submittal, it's more about the timing rather than the content, I would say. I suppose that's probably what I'm getting at.
Ron, do you want to jump in there, please?
Microphone, Ron.
Sorry, I'll see if I can get my hand on or off. Yeah. I want to make some statements without trying to be controversial, okay? But I think we miss a lot of the gap about the seriousness of what we're doing. So if a doctor is a really bad doctor, he might accidentally perform some procedures and an individual may die. Maybe he does it more than once and multiple people die over a career. When someone on the fire side makes a mistake, people die in tens of numbers, okay? And if I were to have a heart attack now and I were to need a bypass and I'd need a valve put into me, I would have something that's 100% certified. Now, these products in the smoke control, especially smoke, I can't speak about the fire doors. I'm not an authority there. When it comes to smoke control and the problem you're having with EN 12101 Part 2, Ben, the products exist. It's having the courage to choose the right product. The person who's responsible should be able to know what test requirements are and are not allowed and to make it function. So it's not about essential characteristics. It's about required characteristics. Okay, and if we take the gray out of the code, it's very easy to get the correct product in the right place at the right time. We looked at smoke duct. Smoke duct, Part 7 smoke duct, has requirements where it can't be larger than 1250. Because it can't be larger than 1250 in one direction, it's very unlikely we can exhaust more than 10 cubic meters of smoke through that duct. Okay, which means we're not going to use fans bigger than a 900 diameter fan, okay, because you're going to need more air. Then you've got to have alternative solutions, and that's where the engineers need to be worth their salt and actually design correctly and not necessarily rely on the suppliers for design input, but relate to the supplier for the product availability. Okay, and I think, and that's why I started saying the guy who starts the design needs to be accountable from cradle to grave. And that way we stop having people die in buildings because it's an historical building and we put a window actuator on an existing window. Okay, the window is not EN compliant. Okay, take it out and put a proper window in that
That's
meets
exactly
all the requirements.
That's exactly the point. But then those windows, you know, they only go up to a certain size and they're only compatible with certain manufacturers, and any engineer, even a good one, may not pick up on all of those things. So you would expect that there's going to be a design that's, where the engineer's taken it to a point where it's saying, I think this is complete, I think it's compliant, but please can you have a look at it and let me know if I've missed anything? And that's where the specialist comes in.
Yes, so interfacing with the specialist is one thing, but the engineer needs to know that when I look at a window in an existing building, okay, we're so worried about the historical content of that window instead of replacing it with the correct window. All right, we don't do a structural design where we've got to use a RSJ 200 by 250 and change it to 203 by 272. That size doesn't exist. We're quite happy to accommodate the structure because we don't want our building falling down, but we won't be around when people are dying in the building. So why don't we have the courage to say, sorry guys, the biggest window you can have is 1 meter by 1 meter. Modify your design to suit the certified product. Don't start modifying the essential characteristics to get a window to work. And I'm just picking on a window. Sorry, Will. We could be picking on a fan. We could be picking on a duct. So if I've got a ceiling void, why am I throttling a duct to a 1:5 aspect ratio and trying to convince the world that I can now get an axial fan to work against a pressure drop, static pressure of 1.2 kPa? You can't do that. Okay, so forget the engineering romance. Okay, we don't just put a 300 by 300 beam on a 2-story building and then build 6 stories because it's convenient. Why are we compromising as a fire industry? Sorry, I don't mean to rock everybody's weekend, but it's time we take it out and show everybody how big it is and say no.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing as, I guess, going into this sort of PD role, because ultimately what everyone's talking about here, it shows, I guess, the benefit of having multiple people in the same room or the same table, not in a sort of salami sliced process, which I think, again, theoretically, Gateway 2 is asking for. So that earlier design, earlier appointment of both designers and specialists and installers. So in a way, DMB doesn't have to die, actually just needs to move forward a stage for it to be really useful, because you do get the specialist info or knowledge of the main contractor and the supply chain that they are got arrangement with or agreement. So again, at a very high level, if I'm going to be the PD, those kind of questions that you picked up there are the kind of things that really can only occur when you've got, say, the designer and the specialist and, let's say, the kind of a couple of the other related parties in the same room. So because otherwise, how can we make that statement that we've gone through the correct thinking, looked at the risks and the kind of constraints, and have chosen the right product to be able to submit something at Gateway 2 to say, we believe this design is compliant. So for me, all the things you said there are all clearly relevant, but those discussions can only happen more in a circular one room kind of scenario, rather than passing a design spec down to another level person, down, which is currently what's happening, and then get changed again later on down the line.
Guys, I'm conscious that we're 10 minutes over.
Sorry,
but I think it's been very, very useful. Jim, is it a quick comment?
Just a quick one, Ron, and I'm not querying your numbers or in any way, shape, or form. The stuff that you talk about is absolute, but I can tell you that the guidance that we've had over 30 years is not that specific in a number of areas, and it's given latitude for this thing suitable and sufficient and an engineered solution, and people need to get round obstacles, and so we do need some latitude rather than something that's very, very, very prescriptive. Now, as I say, I'm not questioning the ones that you quote, but in huge amounts of fire safety disciplines, you need to work in some things that where there's compensatory features because the optimum isn't possible. And that's all I'm saying, is I say in just to counteract the very prescriptive, very rigid way, we need to have some latitudes, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. Sorry, George, as always.
No, I mean, I think it just shows you the kind of the value of the discussions and the kind of input. And I think the that last point, Jim, is about the collaborative decision making that has to be baked into the narrative that we submit, which is then supported by the design work, the specifications, the products, etc. we chose, because we all have to stand by it, right? That's the whole point. But look, thank you. I'm conscious of time as well, as you say, George. But thanks for everyone's input. I think the Miro board and stuff have been shared on the links by Jarek. So again, any comments? If you don't know how to do the comments, just add a bit of text or something or anything, or just ask Jarek and I, and we can show you. But any thoughts are really helpful, because it's all evolving. And hope you all have a nice time. Rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks for your time, everyone.
Thanks.
See you.
Cheers,
Bye
everyone.
now.
Bye.